Welcome to the Conception Channel podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Spence Pentland, founder and clinical director of Yinstill. The following episode is based on a real clinical case. To protect privacy, certain identifying details have been changed, but the clinical journey, emotional experience, and treatment principles are real. Today, I want to share a case that I think many women will recognize. This is a woman in her late 30s who'd been trying to conceive for several years. She'd experienced one very early pregnancy loss years before, and since then, every month had become a reminder of how deeply she wanted to become a mother. If you've ever found yourself saying, everything seems normal, so why isn't this happening? Then this conversation is for you. One of the things that struck me most during our conversation wasn't actually her medical history. It was how much pressure she had quietly been putting on herself. She knew her age. She knew time wasn't standing still. She had already gone through fertility investigations. She'd done everything she thought she was supposed to, and yet every month that passed made her wonder if she was running out of time. I see this often. Women arrive expecting me to potentially discover some hidden diagnosis that everyone else missed. Sometimes that happens, but quite often it also doesn't. Sometimes what I see is a body that already possesses many of the ingredients necessary for pregnancy, but isn't quite functioning at its highest potential. And that's a very different conversation. In this particular case, ovulation was occurring, fallopian tubes were shown to be open, her partner's initial semen analysis had been reassuring. She'd conceived before, even though that pregnancy ended early. Those are all encouraging pieces of information. But when I look at a fertility case, I don't only ask whether pregnancy is possible. I ask, what is the body asking for? Because our bodies are always communicating. Not just through blood tests, not just through ultrasound, although those are important, but through sleep, energy, digestion, movement, menstrual cycles, emotions, neurochemical output, stress, recovery, inflammation, pain. These are all conversations the body is having with us every day. One thing we discussed was the length of her menstrual cycle. Many women are told if they're having regular periods, everything must be fine. But regular doesn't always mean optimal. Her cycles were a little shorter than I ideally like to see, not dramatically, just enough to make me pay attention. She also described a slightly heavier menstrual flow with some clotting in tissue. Again, not something to panic about at all, but when I step back and look at the whole picture, I begin realizing, uterine circulation could be improved. Not because something's necessarily wrong, but because there may be an opportunity to support something that's already working, but could be optimized. That distinction matters. Throughout this podcast, you'll hear me use the phrase support physiology. That's intentional. I look for where biology might appreciate just a little more support. And often those opportunities are surprisingly simple. For this woman, one of the biggest opportunities wasn't another supplement. It wasn't another expensive test. It wasn't another procedure. It was movement. She worked at a desk. Most days involved very little physical activity. Now, movement is not magic, although I kind of maybe think it can be. Walking doesn't guarantee pregnancy, I want to reiterate, but our reproductive organs are living tissue. They rely on circulation. They rely on oxygen delivery. They rely on healthy metabolic function. When we improve the overall physiology of the body, we're often improving the environment that supports fertility. So instead of creating an overwhelming fitness program, we talked about something much more sustainable. Walking. 20 minutes. Most days of the week. Adding in a fun activity she had recently discovered with family, something she actually enjoyed and put a smile on her face. One of the most important principles we teach at Yinstill is this. It's not intensity, it's rhythm. Bodies, particularly female bodies, thrive on rhythm. The same principle applies to nutrition. She was eating good meals later in the day, but every morning she was having coffee and not eating until early afternoon. Now, intermittent fasting has become popular for many reasons, but fertility isn't the season of life where I'm usually encouraging women to place additional physiologic stress on the body, especially women who are actively trying to conceive. Sometimes simply introducing breakfast again becomes a very meaningful signal to the body. A small protein-rich meal, nothing complicated, just another way of saying to the body, we're safe, we're nourished, we're supported. Then we talked about sleep. This wasn't someone sleeping for 4 hours a night, nothing like that. She wasn't in any sort of sleep debt crisis. She simply had drifted into a pattern that many couples recognized. Dinner, cleanup, television, one more episode, maybe another, then some scrolling. Suddenly, it's midnight. Again, I'm not looking for perfection, and this isn't about slapping the back of the hand or shame. We're looking for little shifts and little things we can change to optimize. Maybe bedtime becomes 11 instead of midnight. Maybe those extra 45 or 60 minutes become another investment in hormone regulation, recovery, and nervous system health. These little shifts may sound almost too simple, but remember, transformation rarely happens because of one dramatic decision. It happens because of dozens of consistent choices done consistently. That's exactly why we built the Yinstill fertility method around 3 phases. First comes the shift. These are the small changes that begin moving physiology in a healthier direction. Then comes transformation. When these changes are committed to, the body starts adapting. Energy improves, recovery improves, cycles often become more stable. The nervous system begins trusting that life has become a little more rhythmic and predictable. And finally, manifestation. This is where the healthier version of you begins expressing itself. Sometimes that's natural conception. That's the ideal goal. Sometimes that's entering IVF from a much stronger physiologic foundation. Sometimes it's just regaining confidence and trust in your body and your overall health. Either way, we're preparing the body to receive rather than simply react. Now, before I finish, I also want to acknowledge something important. Fertility is never only about one partner. Even when an initial semen analysis appears reassuring or fine or okay, air quotes, male fertility still deserves attention. Sperm are constantly being produced. That means they're remarkably responsive to positive lifestyle changes. Nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, environmental exposures, supplements, these things matter for men too. One of my favorite moments during this consult was hearing that her husband was willing to participate. He wanted to attend acupuncture with her. I love hearing that because fertility becomes far less lonely when both partners move through the journey together. Not because one person's broken and they need support, but because creating life has always been a shared responsibility. As we finished our conversation, she asked a question that so many women ask. Should I be worried because of my age? My answer was simple. Age deserves respect, but it should never replace hope. Hope isn't pretending that biology doesn't exist. Hope is recognizing what remains possible while making wise decisions with the time you have. She was still ovulating. She had conceived before. Her investigations were reassuring. She had meaningful opportunities to strengthen her health further. These are not small things. Those are reasons to move forward with calm confidence. So if you're listening today and parts of this story sound familiar, I hope you remember this. Your fertility journey doesn't have to be driven by fear. It can be guided by understanding, by consistency, by patience, and by caring for the whole person, not just the reproductive organs. Your body is always communicating with you. When we learn to listen well, support it wisely, and remain consistent, remarkable things can happen.